For today's video, I want to help simplify liquid fertilizers for beginners. This is often a confusing topic for people new to the planted tank side of the hobby, and it can lead to people purchasing products they simply don't need. Not only does this waste money, but depending on your specific tank setup, it can also drastically increase the chances of algae breakouts in your tank. So I want to start by explaining what liquid fertilizers actually are, because there's often some confusion about what's actually in the bottle. At their core, liquid fertilizers are literally water mixed with variant nutrient salts in specific ratios, that's it. These nutrient ratios are formulated to try and give your plants everything they need for healthy plant growth in your aquarium. Although we add these products directly to the tank's water column, aquatic plants can utilize them in multiple ways. In their submerged form, aquatic plants can absorb significant amounts of nutrients directly through their leaves and stems. Additionally, many popular aquarium substrates have a cation exchange capacity, or CEC, which allows them to pull nutrients directly from the tank's water column and store them in the substrate and make them accessible to your plant's roots. I'll go over the different types of liquid fertilizer later in the video, but most of them contain a mix of the following elements. First, we have macronutrients, which are nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, which plants need in large amounts to grow correctly. Next, we have secondary nutrients, which are calcium, magnesium and sulfur, and these aren't required in quite large amounts like macronutrients, but plants still need them more than micronutrients. And finally, we have the micronutrients, and these are the trace elements where plants only need small amounts of them for healthy growth, but they're still essential for healthy plants. Being deficient in any of these nutrients can result in your plants growing incorrectly, and there's plenty of nutrient deficiency charts online with explanations of which deficiency is most common with which symptom in your plants, such as yellowing leaves, browning leaves, stunted growth and things like that. So moving on, and we get to the actual types of liquid fertilizer on the market, and first up we have the all-in-one fertilizer, sometimes called complete fertilizers. These are designed to provide everything that your aquarium plants need straight out of the bottle, and are probably the most popular type of liquid fertilizer on the market. Ironically though, they are often not the type of liquid fertilizer that most people need in the hobby, and this is a common cause of algae breakouts in aquariums. To make things even more confusing, different all-in-one liquid fertilizer products can contain very different amounts of each nutrient. This is a comparison table that I made showing the differences between TNC Complete and Tropica Specialist Nutrition, which are two of the most popular all-in-one fertilizers in my area. As you can see, the differences are significant, and TNC Complete contains around 400% more potassium, but it does lack some of the nutrients in the Tropica product completely. This is one of the reasons many people report algae problems when using all-in-one fertilizers. These products often add large amounts of nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus to your tank, which already should be in there from fish waste and leftover food and decaying plant matter, resulting in algae using up the leftover nutrients in the tank. Next, we have light fertilizers, which are sometimes called lean fertilizers. These are similar to all-in-one products, but manufacturers have taken into account that your tank likely already has plenty of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water column from your fish waste. So, light fertilizers typically leave out the nitrogen and phosphorus in their nutrient mix while still including potassium, the secondary nutrients and the trace elements which are required by your plants. I know a lot of beginners instantly overlook these products thinking they need the extra nitrogen in their tank, but in reality, if you're running a low-tech tank, this is probably the type of liquid fertilizer that more people will get more benefit out of and less algae growth. Unless you have liquid test kits to monitor it in your own tank, you'd probably be surprised by how much nitrogen and phosphorus even a moderately stocked and moderately fed tank can produce in a week. So there's really no need to pay extra for the all-in-one complete fertilizers for those nutrients when you're just adding to them and probably increasing the chance of algae growth. Plus, many light fertilizers are specifically formulated for low-tech setups without CO2 injection and high-powered lighting. This means that their nutrient levels are scaled down to match the slow growth rate of plants in these low-tech setups. This is a comparison table that I made between TNC Complete and TNC Light, which again are very popular in my area. As you can see, the nitrogen and phosphorus are completely removed in the light version, as well as potassium and magnesium also being included in a far lower amount. So if you are running a low-tech tank and absolutely insist on using a liquid fertilizer, something like this is probably going to be the best option. Next up are specialist fertilizers, sometimes called targeted additives. These don't try to cover everything that your plant needs, instead they focus on specific nutrients so you can dose only what's needed and deficient in your tank. The most common example of this is API leaf zone, which only contains potassium and iron, both of which are frequently deficient in planted tanks. The idea is that by only including a few ingredients, these products can stay very affordable and let people dose the commonly deficient nutrients in their tank. Unfortunately, at least in my area, these now cost roughly the same as all-in-one completes or light fertilizers, so they're really not that viable anymore in my opinion. This is a quick comparison showing how API leaf zone stacks up against the two all-in-one products that I mentioned earlier. While it does contain more potassium and iron, it's missing so many other nutrients that at its current price tag in the market, I honestly don't see the point in using it. Finally, we have DIY fertilizers where you mix your own setups using raw nutrient salts. I know this instantly puts a lot of people off, but if you're running a high-tech setup, especially with multiple high-tech tanks, then the DIY route can drastically cut your costs. There's a free tool called the IFC Aquarium Fertilizer Calculator available on the UCAPS forum that makes this process very simple. It even shows you the ratios you need to mix to replicate some very popular products in the market to help drastically reduce your costs. You will need to source the nutrient salts and mix them properly yourself, but I have spoken to a few people I know who do use DIY fertilizers, and two of them replied to me and said that they think it cut their costs by around 80% when it comes to their liquid fertilizers. That said, if you are running low-tech tanks or only have one or two high-tech setups, I personally prefer the convenience of ready-to-use products that you can use directly out of the bottle. So moving on, and I want to talk about when you actually need liquid fertilizers, because I do think this might surprise a lot of people new to the planted tank side of the hobby. In my honest opinion, most people watching this video probably don't need liquid fertilizers in their tanks at all. I don't currently use liquid fertilizers in any of my tanks, and I'm very happy with the plant growth that I'm getting. Instead, I use what's called the fish poop fertilization method, and I have a blog post on it that I link in the description that covers it in detail. Still, there are some situations where liquid fertilizers may make sense, and here's a few examples. All-in-one liquid fertilizers can still be helpful in heavily planted but low bio-load tanks, so think of things like shrimp-only tanks, or maybe a betta fish tank where the betta is the only fish in there producing waste. In those cases, the nitrogen and phosphorus that's being naturally produced in the tank can still be deficient, so you might need to dose it from an all-in-one fertilizer to keep your plants healthy. But even in those situations, I'm still not convinced it's the best option. Up until about a month ago, I was using an all-in-one fertilizer on my betta fish tank. The idea was that there's a lot of Limnophila sessiliflora and Amazon frogbait in this tank, which grow very quickly and can suck a lot of nutrients out of the water. But since my betta shares this tank with shrimp and snails, I decided to switch over to the fish poop fertilization method and add a little bit more food to support the inverts, and so far, it's working perfectly fine. In fact, since I've stopped dosing liquid fertilizers in this tank, I haven't noticed any difference in the plant growth that I'm removing during trimming sessions. Light fertilizers can be a better fit for heavily stocked tanks where the fish waste already provides a lot of the nutrients required by the plants, or potentially tanks that don't have many plants in them. As I mentioned earlier, these are often designed with low-tech tanks in mind that don't use CO2 or high-powered lighting, where the plant growth is far slower than a CO2 tank, so the nutrient demands are lower. But on the flip side of that, because the nutrient demands of the plants are lower, a lot of the time fish poop fertilization will be more than enough to keep your plants healthy. Specialist fertilizers can have their place, especially when dealing with potassium, iron and sometimes magnesium deficiencies, as it's a quick and easy way to get these into your tank. But as I mentioned earlier, the main problem with this type of fertilizer, at least right now, is their price, because their prices have drastically increased in the last year or two, where it's just not worth it anymore. Personally, instead of using specialist fertilizers in my tanks, I simply switched over to feeding my invertebrates high potassium foods like spinach, mulberry leaves and dandelion leaves, and so far it does seem to be working. Not only does this improve the diet of your invertebrates such as shrimp and snails in your tanks, but their waste is also theoretically at least higher in these often deficient minerals and help your plants grow. DIY fertilizers can be great if you have a lot of high-tech setups, because they do work out a lot cheaper if you put a little bit of time into actually making your fertilizers yourself. Beyond that, I do think this is a lot of effort for what it is, especially for the average planted tank keeper who is usually on the low-tech side of the hobby, where in my experience, fish poop fertilization can work perfectly well. So to wrap up this section of the video, I just want to reiterate that I'm not currently using any liquid fertilizers in any of my aquariums, and I have absolutely no plans to start using them again. For my setups, the fish poop fertilization method works perfectly fine, and like I said earlier, I linked to my article on them in the video description. I do want to quickly touch on the plant growth triangle to try and help visualize why liquid fertilizers are often a waste of money for people on the low-tech side of the hobby. This triangle represents the three main things that plants need for healthy growth in an aquarium, which are light, CO2 and nutrients. Any one of these can be a limiting factor, and when one of them is lacking, plant growth will slow down no matter how much of the other two you provide. With modern LED lighting being far more powerful than older systems, lighting is rarely an issue in low-tech tank setups these days. I linked to my article on affordable aquarium lights in the description, which I keep updated as new models are released onto the market. It's not based on spec sheets and sales pages, it's based on lights that I personally use on my own tanks and have great plant growth with them. As I mentioned earlier, fish waste can provide plenty of nutrients for your tanks in low-tech setups, especially if you're using higher quality, more nutrient-dense foods like fluval bug bites or the Hikari micro pellets. Between leftover food, decaying plant matter, and fish waste decaying in the tank and mineralising their trapped nutrients into the water column, there's usually plenty of things in there to support healthy plant growth. So that leaves CO2. I don't use CO2 injection in any of my tanks, and I live close to Horizon Aquatics, which are an aquascaping specialist here in the UK, so I have seen firsthand just how much quicker their plants grow compared to mine because they are using CO2 injection systems. In a low-tech tank without CO2 injection, the CO2 content of your tank will almost always be the limiting factor of your plant growth. So no matter how much liquid fertilizer you add to the tank without sufficient CO2 to support the required growth requirements to make use of those extra nutrients in the liquid fertilizer, you're basically wasting money and increasing the chances of algae in your tank. On top of that, you're likely just increasing the total dissolved solid count of your water and then removing them the next time you do a water change. Now, specialist fertilizers are a little bit different for this one. As I mentioned, they are usually used to counter specific, very common nutrient deficiencies such as potassium, iron and magnesium in our aquarium, so they can be a little bit more helpful in the right situation. But even then, like I said, there are often natural workarounds by just making tweaks to what you feed the invertebrates in your tank if you keep shrimp and snails. So the key part that I want to emphasize in this section of the video is that liquid fertilizers are just one piece of the plant growth puzzle. It's not everything like a lot of beginners think. And if you're struggling or worried about growing aquatic plants without CO2 in your own aquarium, I also have an article on that which I link to in the description, which breaks down the full process using natural sources of CO2. Next up, I want to touch on a process called nitrate reduction, and this is a process that plants use to convert nitrogen compounds into ammonium, which is the only form of nitrogen that they can use directly to produce amino acids and proteins. Most people are already familiar with the basic nitrogen cycle, where toxic ammonia is converted into toxic nitrite and then into far less toxic nitrate by beneficial microorganisms in our tanks. This is what helps to keep our aquariums safe for our fish and invertebrates, and to some extent our plants, by making sure the toxins in there are as low as possible. Because both ammonia and nitrite are toxic, and because at least some of the far less toxic ammonium can be converted back into toxic ammonia, all liquid fertilizers that I'm personally aware of use nitrate as their nitrogen source, as it's far safer to use in stock tanks. But here's the catch: plants can't actually use nitrate directly. They'll need to absorb that nitrate and then convert it back into ammonium using nitrate reduction before they can actually put it to use. I do have an accompanying blog post for this video which I link to in the description, which has all of the sources for this in the footnotes if you are interested. But some sources suggest that the conversion process can use up to 83 calories per mole. And to try and visualise that a little better, a mole is a chemical unit that most of us, including myself, don't deal with on a regular basis, but 1 mole of water is around 18 grams or just over a tablespoon. Now, nitrogen compounds will be slightly different just to the different structures of the chemical compounds, but I just wanted to try and visualise how much that actually is. But the point I'm trying to make is that 83 calories is a lot of energy for an aquatic plant where CO2 is often a limiting factor, and to put that in perspective, 83 calories is actually more than the average chicken egg, which usually contains 82 to 80 calories. So essentially we are forcing our plants to burn more energy that's in the average chicken egg just to make 1 mole of nitrate usable for them to make amino acids and proteins. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any research specific to aquarium plants in their submerged form, because a few things do change compared to terrestrial plants out of water, but I did find one study about this on terrestrial plants. It found that plants given ammonium as their nitrogen source from the start had a higher growth rate than plants that had to perform nitrate reduction and waste energy converting nitrate into ammonium. Now, filterless tanks aren't for everyone, and I have a bunch of content linked in the description that goes into a lot more detail on how to successfully set up a filterless aquarium. The majority of my tanks are now filterless, meaning that plants, not microorganisms, are the primary method for maintaining safe and stable water parameters for my fish, shrimp and snails. But this simple tweak allows for a more intermediate version of the nitrogen cycle to take place in my aquariums, where plants have a better chance of absorbing ammonium directly rather than having to wait for it to be converted into nitrate by microorganisms like a standard filtered tank. Because the various nitrogen compounds in the tank aren't being pushed through the nitrogen cycle, it just saves plants from having to waste all of those calories from converting nitrate into ammonium for them to actually use it in the tank. Now, I know I went on a little bit there, but it's a very commonly overlooked topic that a lot of people don't even know about, and it is important because you are wasting energy in a low-tech tank where CO2 is a limiting factor, so there are just other options available instead of just dosing nitrate with a liquid fertilizer. So the main takeaway here is that even though you're adding nutrients with all-in-one liquid fertilizers, nitrate isn't the most efficient nitrogen source for your plants. In low-tech setups, especially filterless tanks, the fish poop fertilization method can actually become far more effective because your plants are getting direct access to ammonium from the start. And if you're using a filtered setup using beneficial microorganisms to hold the cycle in your tank, there will still be some access to ammonium in there because of the delay in converting ammonia to nitrite. So that just helps to reinforce how the fish poop fertilization method can be so effective in low-tech planted tanks compared to dosing liquid fertilizers that use nitrate as their nitrogen source. Finally, I want to talk about how to dose liquid fertilizers in your tank if you still choose to use one, which is perfectly fine. It's your tank, you do you. Now, I've seen a lot of advice out there and some pretty heated discussions on how to correctly dose liquid fertilizers to a tank, but in my opinion, all of them are wrong. As I mentioned earlier, the nutrient content in different products, even if they are still marketed as all-in-one liquid fertilizers, can vary drastically with what's actually inside of them. So because of this, there's no one-size-fits-all dosing method for every single tank that will work every single time. We have to factor in things like the specific species of plants you're keeping and how many of them you have in your tank. We also have to look at the natural bioload of your tank, which is things like what species of fish are you having in there, how many are in there, what food are you feeding, how much food are you feeding, and how frequently are you feeding the tank. And we also have to try and factor in how your tank processes the nitrogen compounds, whether your tank relies on microbial filtration via a filter or plant-based filtration can make a difference. And then of course is, does your tank use CO2 injection or natural sources of CO2 to grow your plants? With faster growing plants, your nutrient demand increases significantly, so you're going to need to dose a lot more liquid fertilizer compared to other setups. So this is my recommendation on how you should actually be dosing liquid fertilizers in your tank, and unfortunately it takes time because there's a lot of testing and adjusting. This can take a few weeks or even a few months to try and figure out your tank specific needs, because if your plants are thriving but algae is starting to creep in, then you're going to have to reduce how much you dose to your tank. But if algae isn't an issue but your plants aren't looking great, you're going to have to increase it. So I'd personally start with 1 ml of liquid fertilizer dosed once per week and then test and adjust from there, but again there's just so many variables at place. And this circles back to the key point that I've been trying to make consistently through this video. If the plants in your tank aren't showing any signs of nutrient deficiency, then the fish poop fertilization method in your tank is working perfectly fine and you don't need a liquid fertilizer. Now, I know there's a lot of other content creators in this space who do use liquid fertilizers on a regular basis in their low-tech planted tanks, but I am honestly curious what would happen if they stopped dosing them and just switched to the fish poop fertilization method. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Thanks for watching, have a good day and good luck with your planted tanks.